Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And a reminder, as we always do on this program, when we say go green, we ain't talking about mere environmentalism. We talk about something deeper, interconnected deep ecology. And whether you come at that from a eco-feminist spiritual perspective, or you come at that from a Western linear science perspective, or like me, you say those are both perfectly valid ways of understanding the world, I'm here to tell you we are connected in this web of life. Whatever we do to that web, we ultimately do to ourselves. And let's be honest, y'all, we doing it wrong. We're literally commodifying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. We're creating a racist, sexist, and class oppressive world order with the plunder. And luckily, here on Redneck Gone Green, we bring you voices of people who say we can do something about this. And on that note, let's bring in our good pal, Shane Knight. Shane, how you doing, brother?
All things considered, man, I'm hanging in.
Looky here, let's be honest. When we say all things considered, what we're talking about is that we are in the midst of an illegal, immoral, unconstitutional war of empire. That war threatens to literally not only become a regional war, but maybe a world war. Like, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. And I
And
don't
look,
understand why people aren't more angry than they already are either.
well, let's dive into that. But before we bring in our guest, who is uniquely qualified to talk about this war, Shane, you and Ruthie were actually bringing me up to speed on some stuff happening in my home state of Texas. You want to say what you told me just a few minutes ago?
Yeah, it was a shocking decision that came through. A federal grand jury wound up indicting a group of young protesters, or not indicting, but convicting a group of young protesters, claiming that they were part of the Antifa radical left-wing movement, who I think it was in Alvarado, Texas, but the court case was actually held in Fort Worth. Um, they were described as having supported an act of terrorism, right? That they attacked the ICE facility there in Alvarado, shooting a police officer in the neck. The evidence, though, that emerged from the trial offered a bit more of a complicated view of the entire scenario. But it was a serious decision that came through that I've talked to several people since then about the whole incident, and a lot of people are, sounding the alarm bells, really, because if this is to set a precedent, and then they want to be able to label anyone who was peacefully protesting, non-violently protesting, as anti-fascist, Antifa, right? And then lock them up, then there's a whole new ball game for us to try to deal with.
Well, I told you, Shane, that our guest this week is uniquely qualified to weigh in on that as well as the war itself. Professor Stephen Zunes is a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco. He's a leading scholar on U.S. foreign policy generally, the Middle East specifically, and what I love about it, get this, Shane, specific specialty in study of strategic nonviolent movements. Professor Zunes has written extensively on Iran, sanctions intervention. He serves as a senior policy analyst for foreign policy and focus and at the Institute for Policy Studies. Professor Zunes, welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Great to be with you, David.
So look at here. Like I said, I think that you were kind of uniquely qualified on this topic. And I want to ask you, I literally am learning from Shane and Ruthie this situation in Texas. I'm wondering if you were aware of that and if you could just start your conversation by bringing us up to speed on that case, if you know about it.
I don't know a whole lot about it, but it reminds me very much of the old conspiracy trials you may remember from the late 1960s, early 70s, where if there is a violent incident at the protest, even if it was caused by the police or even if it was by a few flaky people on the periphery, the organizers of the protest were indicted as having somehow conspired to create this kind of violent incident. And essentially, it's a way of suppressing free speech by holding organizers of nonviolent movements somehow legally responsible for any kind of violence that takes place at any point related to the particular protests. Again, even if the responsibility ultimately lies with the law enforcement authorities.
So thank you for that, Professor, because again, so folks who know me, I'm a young 63 years old, right? But I'm just saying, I help organize a bunch of events against the Iraq War. I help to do a lot of big mass, peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience actions during the global justice movement. So I did not live through that. But I know historically that had happened a lot in the 60s. And then you go back before that, the Haymarket, like this has been done before, but it's also not anything that anybody of this generation has really experienced. We are really seeing a level of criminalization of dissent under this Trump administration that we haven't seen in several decades, at least. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes, very much so. And I think this might be part of why we haven't seen the massive protests we saw in the lead up to the Iraq War or other U.S. interventions. There is concern that protesting a war in the eyes of this administration will be seen as treasonous, and you could all the authority of not just the police, but the Justice Department and the Republican appointed judges and everybody else coming down. But also, I think there's a sense that this administration is so beyond the pale in terms of being concerned about what the public thinks of them. I mean, I have had a bad feeling when Trump gave his State of the Union address. Because if you think back to when George W. Bush gave his State of the Union address just before the invasion of Iraq, he spent half his speech trying to make the case about why we should invade. Now, it was a bunch of lies, as we pointed out at the time, and ended up being the case. But at least he made the effort. At least he went to Congress to get authorization. Trump, out of a 1 hour, 48-minute speech, the longest State of the Union in history, he spent less than 3 minutes talking about Iran and why we might need to go to war. And I think it just underscored the fact that he really doesn't care what the American people think. He doesn't care what Congress thinks. He's just willing to do this on his own. So I think there is a sense that, especially given how the Republicans are totally in lockstep with whatever Bush has done to a degree that no party has ever been towards the president of their own party. There's always been at least some dissent. That I think a lot of people are just feeling kind of hopeless. Also, we grew up. I grew up in an era, where we saw victories from the anti-Vietnam War movement, from the struggles against intervention in Central America, against apartheid in South Africa. Some notable but not complete victories challenging the nuclear arms race, and we've seen a lot of progress on a lot of issues, even obscure ones like East Timor, where people just kept pressing the issue, and we eventually won. This generation, unfortunately, they've seen the massive massive protests around Black Lives Matter, and things have only gotten more repressive and more more racist, and massive protests about U.S. culpability in Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. And again, that seemed to have been to no avail, even under a Democratic administration. Again, I could give other examples as well, but I think many of our young people today are feeling discouraged because they have not seen victories as older generations have. They do not believe that they can make a difference. I think they're wrong. I think we still can make a difference, but I can kind of understand why this generation is kind of shell-shocked at this point, and is really feeling rather impotent in terms of what we could actually do to make a difference.
So thank you. That's a brilliant response, and I completely agree. And you are, as I said, exactly the guest to be talking about this. What I'm going to ask you to do is take a step back and in just a short kind of framing way for listeners who haven't really been following closely, and it's been a fast-moving situation. What is actually happening right now between the U.S., Israel, and Iran? Like, where is the situation in the war? How, and really what I'm getting at is, how close are we, in your view, to a wider regional war?
It's already a regional war, and that Iran has ended up attacking a number of countries in the Middle East, in addition to Israel, of course, which is attacking them. They've attacked quite a number of Arab states where the United States has military and financial interest. They're basically saying, if you're allied with the United States, we're going to go after you as well. Now, this is upsetting to a number of these Gulf sheikhs because most of them did not want the U.S. to attack Iran. They were not notified beforehand in order to prepare, because they knew this is exactly what would happen. At the same time, they are rather upset at Iran for targeting them when they didn't support this war and they hadn't given any direct logistical support for the war. So if Iran thought this might get them to pressure the U.S. to stop, it appears to be having the opposite effect. They actually seem to be driving them more into the hands of the United States. But the fact is that for Iran, this is an existential war. That they believe that if they inflict enough damage, if they disrupt the global economy, if they can never match United States or Israel militarily, but if they can engage in enough disruption, then maybe it will send the message that they are not going to be treated this way. I mean, let's look back to 1980 when Iraq invaded Iran. After 2 years of bloody fighting, the Iranians finally pushed them back to the internationally recognized border. But Iran they kept going. They decided to keep fighting because they wanted to punish Iraq for its aggression. And that war went on for another 6 years. Hundreds of thousands of people died. And we're getting some indications from the Iranians that even if Trump did reach out for some kind of ceasefire where he could declare victory and stop or whatever, the Iranians might not be interested. They still seem to keep coming up with these missiles, with these drones, and they're going to keep on firing, disrupting shipping, attacking the financial and strategic centers in the Arab Gulf states. I mean, this could go on for a long, long time.
So, Professor, thank you for that. I'm going to now, because I know your breadth and depth of knowledge of the Middle East is really astounding. And I'm not trying to be sycophantic with you. Like, I've known of your work for coming on 20 years now. So I want you, for the Redneck Gone Green audience, to take us back, I reckon probably to 1953 and the Iranian Revolution, to really give us an understanding of the current crisis, because it really isn't just about oil. I mean, it's clearly about fossil fuels, but there's something deeper going on here, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. First of all, let's remember that Persia has been a major regional power for 2,500 years. And, they don't like being treated like some kind of banana republic or the U.S.
I want you to say that again, because
2,500 years. I mean, this is an ancient civilization, very proud people. In fact, if any of your listeners know anyone of Persian ancestry, you know how proud they are of their unique heritage. And they don't like being pushed around. I mean, when I was in Iran a few years ago, those people I talked to hated the regime. They really wanted to bring it down. But they were very defensive when it came to U.S. policy. It's like, hey, Pakistan, India, Israel had nuclear weapons. Why can't we just have a civilian nuclear power program? I mean, Saudi Arabia treats women worse than our regime does. Why aren't you focusing on that? They could tell the double standards, hypocrisy, how they felt Iran was being unfairly singled out. So this is the first thing I want to emphasize. This is not some little tiny country. This is a country of 90 million people that has been a major player in the region for millennia. Well, in 1953, they had a constitutional monarchy where there was a power struggle going on between the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who was a nationalist, and the American and British-backed Shah, the Shah essentially being the emperor. And the Shah fled into exile, and it was clear that the people supported Mossadegh and his policies, including nationalizing the the oil, which was controlled by the British. Well, the U.S. didn't like the precedent from that. They were concerned that Mossadegh was becoming increasingly dependent on left-wing allies to stay in power. So the CIA came in, working closely with some right-wing generals and the exiled monarch, and ended up staging a coup. Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah came back, this time essentially as an absolute monarch, with the U.S. training his dreaded secret police, the Savak, who were so effective over the next 25 years at jailing, torturing, murdering, exiling the leftist, liberal, nationalist and secular opposition, that the one area they couldn't really control was the mosques. And the thing about Shia Islam, which is the minority branch of Islam that most Iranians adhere to, is that unlike Sunni Islam, they have a clear hierarchy. Ayatollahs are essentially like cardinals in the Catholic Church. So in addition to supervising the houses of worship within their constituency, they also have schools and hospitals and social service agencies and everything. So in other words, it was the clerics that had a social base, since the Shah had pretty much eliminated most of the rest of civil society. So when the revolution happened, the Shah was overthrown. It was the clerics, and in fact, a particularly reactionary wing of the clerical establishment that ended up taking over. And they were very anti-American and very extreme. I mean, indeed, the CIA had brought in former SS officers from Germany to train the Savak in so-called interrogation techniques, as in torture. I mean, there's a lot of bitterness. This is where the extreme anti-Americanism comes in. Now, again, these are a very reactionary, theocratic, misogynist, chauvinistic, corrupt. I mean, it's a nasty lot that's in charge, no question about it. But they would not have ever gotten in charge. They would have never come to power if the U.S. had not overthrown the democratically elected government and supported the Shah's brutal repression.
Professor, thank you so much for in such a short period of time really giving us the big picture context and really laying it at the feet of the U.S. empire and the British Empire together. Let's be very clear about what that 1953 event was. The reality is the Shah was in power because of the U.S., and the heavy-handedness of the Shah is what led to this brutal regime. And I want to join with you, Professor. Like the clerics who run that place are dangerous human beings, but I am not going to support the horrific war as a result. Like this is a situation where we have to understand that U.S. imperial policy has blowback. I want to ask you also, you've alluded to it, but I want you to go a little deeper, if you would, into how the Iran nuclear deal changed the dynamics and what happened when the U.S. withdrew from that.
Well, Iran has had a nuclear program ever since 1958, when the Eisenhower administration really pushed them to develop nuclear power. We provided them with the power plants and with the fissile isotopes and all the kind of technology and fuel and all that kind of stuff, and we encouraged it into the 1970s. And when the revolution first happened, 1979, when the clerics seized power, they eliminated it. But they were concerned because, when Iraq had invaded Iran and used chemical weapons, and the world stood by, did nothing. In fact, the U.S. actually helped Iraq in providing them with the raw materials for the chemical plants and helping the Iraqis target Iranian fuel positions or troop positions by sharing satellite data. Iranians were concerned when they heard President Clinton and President Bush saying, Iraq is developing nuclear weapons. And they thought, well, maybe if Iraq's developing nuclear weapons, maybe we should do some preliminary research on our own. And that's what got them in trouble, because they didn't report it. And if you're a signatory of the International Atomic Energy Agency, you're supposed to report these kinds of things. And that's what led the international community to put sanctions on them, to say you cannot reprocess fuel like other signatories of the IAEA can do. And so, but again, there's no indication, except for this very short period of time just before the Iraq invasion. And of course, once they found out that Iraq really didn't have a nuclear weapons program, they stopped their nuclear weapons program. So ever since then, they've just had a nuclear power program. Now, I oppose nuclear power for all the good reasons that anybody should oppose nuclear power anywhere, where they don't really need it, and their reactors are subpar, they're too close to earthquake faults, and you can go on and on while they shouldn't have a nuclear program. But the Iranians they have a right to have one, and given that these other countries have nuclear weapons and everything else, why is the U.S. so obsessed? I mean, we supposedly could survive 15,000 Soviet nuclear weapons pointed at us in the height of the Cold War because of deterrence. Why are we freaked out at the prospect of Iran getting maybe one or two weapons? Now, I mean, when you think of Iraq, got rid of their nuclear program, brought the IAEA inspectors back in. They got invaded, and their government overthrown. North Korea, along with Iraq and Iran, on the axis of evil, according to President Bush, they threw out the inspectors, started developing nuclear weapons. They're still in power. So, if the Iranians do have intentions to go in a nuclear weapons direction, it would be for deterrence. And that's what freaks out the United States and Israel, because the thing they hate about Iran is not on the nuclear issues, because we have other countries that are violating Security Council resolutions on the nuclear program. And we had a nuclear agreement back in 2015 that made it physically impossible for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. What are we freaked out about Iran? Is that they are the only major country left in the region that opposes U.S. hegemony, and that is really what we're after. They not, neither U.S. or Israel wants any kind of country that opposes their hegemonic reach.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're answering the next question that I actually had teed up. So I'm just going to ask it. What do you think are the real strategic goals of the U.S. and Israel in this war?
I think basically, again, it's not to get rid of their nuclear program, because their nuclear program was completely defanged back in 2015. Had the most rigorous inspection regime I've ever seen outside of wartime. I mean, there's no way they could have developed a nuclear weapon. If the U.S. wanted to prevent that, we could have just gone back to that agreement. So again, it's not the nuclear issue at all. Certainly not democracy, given all the horrendous regimes that the U.S. supports. It's not even about their missile program, because they'd never attacked any country ever unless they were attacked first, and this has been true of Iran for hundreds of years. What it's about, again, is that they they oppose the prerogatives that the United States and Israel have for the region. And so the idea, I think, since regime change is very, very unlikely. This is not one of those situations where you just remove the bad guy and that creates an opening where democratic forces can move in. Iran is not one-man rule. It's a complex web of interests that have a stake in the system. In fact, in certain ways, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps have at least as much power as the clerics do. Even if you kill many of the leaders, they got many layers, and they're going to stay in power. No regime change is taking place alone. So I think really what this is about is just to turn around to a state, basically to destroy as much as possible. Not just military targets, nuclear targets, government targets. We're starting to destroy some of the basic infrastructure in the country. We're starting to destroy many basic industries. We're not. The U.S. and Israel aren't just targeting the hardline leaders of the government. They're going after all sorts of Iranian leaders, both from the right. They killed former President Ahmadinejad, but also from the left. They ended up. The U.S. apparently targeted the Mir Hussein Mousavi, who was the former prime minister, who was the leading figure in the Green Revolution of 2009, the pro-democracy movement. and he's been under house arrest ever since that time. And U.S. bombers targeted his residence. Fortunately, he and his wife escaped. But I think it underscored that basically the idea is to destroy any kind of leadership and turn it into a failed state. That's why we're also talking about arming Kurds and Azeris or Baluchis or other ethnic groups. Because remember, Iran is barely 50% Persian. There are a lot of national minorities within the country's boundaries as well. So this really, I think this is a long term goal, is just to destroy as much of Iran as possible.
So again, thank you so much for so clearly making sense of what's really going on there, Professor. I knew you would be the right person to bring onto this program. I will also say you have generated a great conversation that's going on in the chat, the live chat. So I want to ask, one of our viewers, listeners, has written in to say, I participate in protest every weekend and wonder about vetting of the participants, sort of like a bouncer at a bar, to limit the chance of issues. Because you have such expertise specifically in nonviolence and the effectiveness of such demonstrations, Professor, the question is, what do you think about the use of peaceful nonviolent protest within the U.S. and how to most effectively engage in that kind of protest?
Well, certainly making clear that there is widespread opposition to this war is critically important. And one thing that gives at least a little bit of hope is that even America's most controversial wars, like Iraq, once the war began, there was a rallying around the flag effect. People felt we had to support our troops or whatever. And so, the popularity of the war was almost always high initially, and started to dissipate when more and more Americans started coming home in body bags, when the goals seemed more and more elusive, when the war seemed to drag on with no end in sight. But this war, unlike any American war in history, the majority of Americans are opposing it from the outset. There is only a little
the right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Like
including
I want you to talk about what we're seeing. Like Marjorie Taylor, like this is something that to me is almost astounding. The degree to which Trump sycophants are clearly and vehemently against this war.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, remember, Trump became president because he outflanked Clinton on the left, saying if she supported the invasion of Iraq, she supported this long war in Afghanistan, she supported the invasion in Libya, I'm going to bring the troops home, America first, no more endless wars in the Middle East. And if you look at the 10 areas in the 4 northern tier swing states that went most dramatically from the anti-war Obama in 2008, 2012 to Trump in 2016, they match almost exactly the areas of the highest casualty rates from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. This is, along with the whole neoliberal globalization stuff, this is how the white working class shifted from the Democrats to Republicans, because Trump said, I will not send, because it's their sons and daughters who are the ones that are being shipped over to the Middle East. And so this is a key constituency of Trump, and he is losing them by getting the United States into this Middle Eastern war with no endgame.
So this is really helpful, I think, to understand. And Professor, I'm going to invite you to sort of grade my papers, right? But as I'm watching this, what I'm seeing is what looked like beginning to be hairline fractures in the sort of MAGA movement, right? You had America Firsters, you had the tech bros, you had the classic finance capitalists, you had the old industrialists. I'm starting to see some real cracks here. Am I being overly optimistic, or are you seeing the same thing?
Oh, there's certainly some major cracks. But the bigger question I have is what will the Democrats do to take advantage of that. And on a plus note, with a few exceptions like Fetterman and a few others, the Democrats in Congress have been pretty united in opposing what Trump has been doing. Unfortunately, though, they seem to be emphasizing more the process, that he failed to abide by the Constitution, and that's not insignificant. that's certainly important. But I haven't heard enough of them say, this is, even if we did authorize, even if he did go through the procedures, this is an illegal war. This is a violation of the United Nations Charter. This is a freaking disaster. And they should be, I think, much more explicit in their and vehement in their anti-war sentiment. I mean, I keep seeing these things. Well, Iran must never get a nuclear weapon, but this is not the. We should have gone through the processes. I don't see them demanding a return to the Iran nuclear agreement. And so again, I think this. I've been except for some a handful of people on the party's left wing, I've been disappointed, though I guess unfortunately not totally surprised that the more in the people in the Democratic leadership, haven't been more forceful in their opposition.
So, Professor, I'm glad you actually took that one head on, because I'm just going to lay it out the way I see it. The problem is that there is the neoliberal leadership of the Democratic Party at their core support empire. At the end of the day, the reason that we're not seeing any real fight back on the part of the leadership of Democrats in Congress is because they are fundamentally in support of capitalism. They are fundamentally in support of empire. And it's the reason why I think that we could really build a very powerful movement across ordinary folks who understand that this war is not justified. It is, in fact, immoral. And it just, to me, exposes the fact that the Democratic Party leadership continues to fund war and continues to fund empire. And again, I'll welcome you to push back if you feel like I'm being too partisan in my hatred of both the Democratic and Republican parties.
Well, you don't have to be a green or a leftist to say this. I mean, people like Andrew Besovich, the retired Army colonel and kind of more classic realist international relations scholar. He's pushed this very issue that both parties are wedded to this idea of empire and militarism and endless wars, and it is incredibly disappointing. For your listeners to remember the 1990s, the heady days when all the Cold War is over. We can, put the money put into the Pentagon into needed programs at home. And back then, I wrote an article where I said, with the end of the Cold War and the triumph of neoliberalism, we probably would not see, the kind of coups and military interventions that we saw during the Cold War, because the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, et cetera, had forced countries that wanted to go in a more socialist direction, alternative direction, in line. And I said, I didn't expect any more of these foreign wars by the United States. But I put out three exceptions. So there are three countries that combined a large educated population, adequate food and water resources, and tremendous oil wealth, that they could define this new U.S. hegemonic order. And those three countries were Iraq, Venezuela, and Iran.
So I think it's actually, again, worth pointing out that war funding, the votes, wars continue because Congress funds them. So is there a path forward that you can see that we could, as ordinary folk, begin to put some direct pressure on congressional representatives to stop this war?
Well, Trump at some point is going to have to come to Congress with a supplemental. I mean, this war is costing $1 billion a day. And so there's talk of a $50 billion supplemental that's going to be coming up. Unfortunately, there are Democratic members of the House Armed Service Committee, including Senator Slotkin of Michigan, says, well, we're in the war already. And, and this war is reducing our stocks, in East Asia and in the NATO theater, and we need to replenish those. And so, already you're having some Democrats talking about supporting such a supplemental. But so I think this really is the place we should target. We should tell members of Congress that no, do not support any funding for the Iraq War. That vote no on any kind of supplemental appropriation.
So thank you for that. Again, lasering in. I also have seen in some of your writings, and even in this conversation, you've alluded to the fact that there's already a pretty broad coalition against this war. Now, successful anti-war efforts historically unite groups that don't usually work together: veterans, faith groups, labor unions, civil liberties groups, etc. What are you seeing in terms of a broad coalition to signal the kind of opposition to this war that could be effective?
Well, a couple things. One is that despite everything that we have said about the Democrats, which it's all true, at least nominally, they are all pretty much all against it, and that is certainly a plus. Not as much as we'd like them to, but at least they recognize they have to be on the anti-war side for their own political future. That gives credit to the American people, I think. I think we're the churches, the mainline churches, the Catholic Church and the mainline Protestant denominations have all come out saying, "Hey, this does not meet the criteria of a just war and Christian social teachings." Very, very clear on that. The labor unions have expressed their profound skepticism as well, and generally, I think we already have the bases of a broad coalition. But the problem, in addition to the other factors I mentioned, that is the repression and this younger generation having seen little to gain from large-scale social movements, is the fact that we're fighting on so many fronts right now. Fighting on so many fronts. Basic civil liberties, the environment, particularly climate change, ICE, immigration, institutionalizing racism, and all. We're just exhausted.
Yeah.
We are overwhelmed. And if this was a normal presidency and we were getting to a war like this, I think you would see a lot more people out in the streets. There'd be a lot more attention on this. But there's so much going on right now that it really makes it difficult. So basically what I'm saying is I think all the elements of a very broad anti-war coalition that could make the linkages, not just about opposing this particular war, but of militarism, imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, ecocide. I mean, we have all the elements of putting this together already. The question is, do we have the bandwidth in light of everything that's going on to really make it that kind of movement that can make a difference?
Professor, and thank you for that, because it also leads me. I'll just share my opinion, and I do again want you to interrogate it. I want you to say if you think that I've got it wrong. I mean, you really are an expert. But the way I'm looking at this is that we are literally seeing yes, it's about oil. That's part of it for sure. But also, this is the moment of a waning U.S. empire. The petrodollar is, and the U.S. dollar is weak. We're seeing the U.S. empire in decline. China is rising. This looks to me like a combination of Trump the fascist seeing that there is a weakening of the U.S. empire, and sort of like a petulant child trying to lash out and hold on to something that is slipping from his fingers. Again, if you think that that's simplistic or I've got it wrong, I want you to help me see it.
Oh yeah, this really. I think this may be the equivalent of what the Suez Crisis did to the British and French back in 1956. And that it was a sort of a dying last gasp of empire, because I really think U.S. credibility, which is already tailspinning, has suffered another blow. And the arrogance of Trump, today, just blasting the Europeans for not agreeing to bring in their navies to help bail him out. He's threatening to essentially pull out of NATO and do all these other things to punish them because they are not doing their job. And these the European governments have frankly been, with a few exceptions like Spain, been very disappointing in their refusal to be more forceful against the war, but they haven't really endorsed it either. And because again, they were smart enough to see what the repercussions are. So they're thinking that why should we risk our sailors and our ships and everything for this crazy folly that Trump has gotten himself involved in? Because again, I mean, this idea that we had no idea they closed the Strait of Hormuz. If you Google my name in Strait of Hormuz, you'll see that for the past 25 years or more, I have warned that if we have a um, that if we had a major war with Iran, they'd close the Strait of Hormuz. So it's just about anybody else I know. I mean, the generals and admirals, argued against it, and I was surprised that more of them didn't resign or something because because it really is clearly that the cost, even if you were committed to empire, the cost benefit analysis of this war does not make sense at all. I mean, this
No.
is, I mean, seriously, I mean, it's the old, the old guard, I think, national security elites, national security managers, the people that folks like you and I have struggled against our hard lines. At least the mainstream of them, the more rational elements, are just saying, oh my God, this is going too far. This is going to blow up the whole thing. And so yeah, this is we're having this is this really is going to hurt America's reputation in the world. And the thing is, and here's the great dilemma I think we all have to carry right now. For most of my life, I've spent my whole life as an anti-imperialist activist. That the anti-imperialist struggles in the global South at one point were primarily progressive. Yes, a little autocratic and militaristic for my taste in many cases, but it was pretty clear that they were the good guys, relatively speaking, to the colonialist, neo-colonialist, right-wing dictatorships and everything the U.S. government was supporting. Now the biggest challenges to Western imperialism are reactionary, like the Iranian regime, like the Salafists of Al Qaeda and ISIS, etc., like Putin. I mean that. So it's and so the decline of liberal internationalism is something that has a downside because when the alternative is these reactionary elements, that makes things particularly challenging. But in many ways, the liberal internationalism had sowed the seeds of its own destruction because it was founded on these great idealistic ideas of rule of law, human rights, and all that kind of stuff. But in practice, it was being enforced by an imperial power that was highly selective and where and when they applied those principles.
And well, I
Tr-
I appreciate that you're actually saying this because what it actually shows is those of us who were in fact principled anti-imperialist were right all along. And I'm not
Very
like
much so.
really and truly right. Like this is like the chickens are coming home to roost, and it doesn't. And I know that Malcolm X got in trouble by the liberal establishment for saying it, and I might get in trouble from some aspects of the progressive community for saying it. But I'm here to tell you the anti imperial position was always correct. It is still correct. But the only way we're going to actually get out of this is to completely and fully dismantle the US Western Empire and actually create a democratic world order that is based on ecological sustainability, genuine democracy, and meeting people's objective material needs. Like this empire is going to fall. And like all empires fall, Professor. Like and this one will too. But my fear is that Trump and the idiots who are in control now are going to provoke a thermonuclear war as this empire collapses. Now, again, if you feel like I'm being overly sensational, I want you to correct me. But I'm looking at this like at a level of endgame now. We're going to have to dismantle this empire.
I certainly, ultimately, that's absolutely necessary. Indeed, I'm sure in your show and elsewhere, there's a lot of discussion about how neoliberalism, sowed the seeds of fascism. And in so many ways. But I'm less. I may be naive here, but I do think that the nuclear threshold is something that is pretty solid that even Trump, would not dare to cross. At the same time, though, he is, as we know, he's not mentally stable, and he really is rather impulsive, and he's been being surrounded by sycophants. So I certainly cannot rule it out completely, not by any means.
So looky here. Here's how I see it. Like, and we got about 15 minutes left, more or less. But I'm watching this unfold, and because the clerics really do see this as an existential threat, that I don't see how the U.S. quote wins this war, right? And I also don't see the U.S. population. Trump's own base is eroding already. Like I'm looking to see, and then lastly, Professor, I'm looking at Trump's history is always to find somebody else to blame and throw under the bus. It doesn't matter how deep and loyal and how much you bent the knee and groveled before him, he will throw anybody under the bus. My read is, and again, correct me if you think I'm being simplistic, but either Israel or NATO are going to take the fall, and or Trump's going to attempt to put one of those two entities as to blame for his failure. And again, if you think I got it wrong, help me. Help me.
No, I think you're right on target there. And though Israel obviously has been pushing for a major war with Iran for decades now, when it came to Trump, it was an open door. And I'm skeptical of those who say we're fighting this war for Israel. We're fighting this war with Israel, but I really think Trump would have done so anyway. I remember he's gone to war against 7 other countries in a little more than a year. So the reason I'm saying this is we don't know for sure. I mean, maybe it was a phone call from Netanyahu that made the difference or whatever. I don't know, but we don't know. We don't know either way, and unless we know for sure, I'd be very cautious about blaming Israel for it, because even though so many claims of anti-Semitism are false, so many claims of anti-Semitism are McCarthyistic efforts to silence legitimate criticisms of Israel's genocidal war, of its occupation, or Zionism as a whole, that there really is anti-Semitism out there, just like there's really is sexism, racism, homophobia, all sorts of things, including within the left. And so I just want to, I want to be very, very, what I'm afraid of is when this does end up being a disaster, that people don't end up blaming the Jews. That we've seen this too many times before. We saw, going back to the Dreyfus affair and the Franco-Prussian War, and of course how even some mainstream political scientists like John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt wanted to blame Israel for the Iraq War, despite considerable evidence that again Bush was hell-bent to do that regardless. So yeah, I think Trump will definitely scapegoat, try to find a scapegoat, and they could find the group that has been historically made the scapegoats more than most.
So I appreciate that, and I do want to circle back, underscore, and lift you up for making it clear that criticism of the Israeli policy and Israeli Defense Forces is not the same thing as criticizing Jews. And anti-Semitism is real. It is horrific, and we have to be on the laser focused on the left to ensure that we don't fall into that. I also think that it's important to take a moment about NATO itself, Professor, because if Israel is one scapegoat, to try to target NATO itself seems to me to be a potential opportunity, again, to begin the process of questioning empire itself and full spectrum dominance itself. Again, if I'm being naive, I want you to help me see it different.
I'm not exactly sure he's still with us.
Oh, heck, Shane. I now realizing that as well. Heck.
Yeah,
Boy, what a,
it shows that he's still connected, and it shows that he's still recording. It shows that his camera's on, but we don't see him.
So, Professor, we're not sure what's going on. We reckon that it's on your end. We can see that you are connected according to the Riverside equipment, but the screen is black and we are not hearing anything. So, I'm going to give you a request to see if there's any way you can turn it off and come back in. We'll see. We're pretty much at the end of the show, Shane. But boy, we were right in the middle of a really good conversation. I'm going to invite you, Shane, because again, as a former Marine yourself, anything that you've heard from Professor Zunes or me today that you want to circle back and lift up. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Hey, sorry about that. Not sure what happened, but I heard most of your previous questions. So maybe you should summarize it.
Well, the summary is this: like, if we've got to make sure that we do not allow anti-Semitism to creep up. 100% agree, and if NATO is the more likely scapegoat, honestly, that seems to me to give us some openings, those of us on the principled left, to call to dismantle empire.
Yes, I think in many ways it does. I mean, I think we should be careful, of course, with who we make alliances with, because a lot of the anti-NATO stuff is not is because people side with Putin,
Right.
or because they say they're truly isolationists and don't believe the United States should play any role in the world. I do believe the United States should play a role, given how powerful we are, how rich we are. I think I am an internationalist, but I'm an internationalist in terms of solidarity, not in terms of empire. And so, obviously there's some very important critiques of NATO, from the left as well as from the right. I think that it should be based on the principle should not that we should just be just take care of ourselves and the hell of the rest of the world, but the way we build global solidarity is not through military alliances, but from
So, Professor, if military escalation is the wrong path, then what diplomatic or potential political alternatives exist right now that you see?
I think ultimately it's about building global solidarity, and it's about working with those who are struggling, for a demilitarized, more environmentally sound world, working for a society that's not just based on personal accumulation of profit. There are people like this all over the world, and I'm really tired of these people saying, "Oh, the Muslim world doesn't believe in democracy or whatever. It's kind of hopeless." That's baloney. Polls show that the vast majority of Arabs and Muslims believe in democracy, believe in social justice, and believe it's possible within their societies. But it's the United States that ultimately is holding them back.
So I really appreciate that, and I'm now going to ask again, not just as a Middle East expert, but you are also an expert in nonviolent struggle and social movements. So my question to you is, what role can the U.S. social movement play in preventing this from continuing, and ultimately, how can we help to make this stop?
Looks like it happened again.
Sure did. So I'm going to see if he's able to come back, because that really was the whole conversation had been leading up to asking Professor Zunes that very specific question. So I'm going to ask if he comes back. I'll pose that question to him. We are coming to the top of the hour, Shane. So let's give him just a moment. I hope that we've gotten a good recording, because this has been a fantastic show. And to those of you who are watching live, I want to thank you for being a part of the Redneck Gone Green community. I know that our chat has just been on fire, Shane. I don't know if you've been following it.
I have been, and it's been very interesting.
Yeah, it's been fantastic, and I want to thank the viewers and our listeners live. I'll take this opportunity then to remind you that this is Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. Shane Knight is the co-host. We've spoken with Professor Stephen Zunes of the University of San Francisco. He's an expert in the Middle East generally, and Iran and social movements. Folks, the reality is that this war is illegal, it's immoral, it's unconstitutional. We know that Donald Trump does not give one whit about the rule of law, either international law or the U.S. Constitution. So what we know is ordinary folks like us are going to have to do what ordinary folks like us have always done, which is to come together and to articulate the world that we want to live in. And at the end of the day, y'all, only we ain't nobody coming to save us. We're going to have to come to terms with that. I also want to point out that here on Redneck Gone Green, we're usually focused on solidarity economy. We're focused on very local things that folks can do. But because this war is a global war, that we wanted to bring you the voice of Professor Stephen Zunes, who was phenomenal. And I hope that we've got a good recording for it. I want to thank Professor Zunes for coming onto this program. I also want to let folks know that next week on Monday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll be speaking with Rob Persons, who is with the Institute for Social Ecology. It's going to be a fantastic program. I also want to make this public pledge to y'all. For those of you who follow closely, you know that I write a weekly Substack on conveniently called Redneck Gone Green, where I do a deep dive on each of the guest or topic. Did so this week as well. But in addition, thanks to friends like Shane, like Jason, like others who have suggested that I do even more writing, I'm going to start trying every Saturday or Sunday to also post another thought piece. Sometimes it'll be on current events. Sometimes it'll be just on what I think that the left or the progressives should be doing in the future. So I'm saying it out loud to everybody so that can help Shane hold me accountable. In the meantime, I want to thank you, Shane Knight, for serving as co-host for Redneck Gone Green. I want to thank Ruthie Engelkey, who holds down the back end of it. But most of all, I want to thank you, the viewer or listener of Redneck Gone Green. This community is growing. We're getting larger, stronger, and better organized every day, every week. And it's because people like you like, comment, share, and subscribe. I know everybody says that. And you know why everybody says it? Because it's the only way to bust through this algorithm. We know that the algorithms try to suppress conversations like this. They try to suppress shows like this. But Redneck Gone Green is a program on the Democracy at Work YouTube channel. We are one of multiple shows that are being broadcast over that Democracy at Work YouTube channel. So I want to invite you to join us at Redneck Gone Green Substack, but also join the Democracy at Work YouTube channel, because not just this program and not just Economic Update and Capitalism Hits Home, but Shane, you got a whole bunch of other programs that are beginning to come on the line. And I'm going to put you on the spot to tell our listeners and viewers about some of those other programs that y'all are cooking up.
Well, it's been a very busy few weeks for us. I can't tell half the time during my day if I'm going or coming, because we're gearing up to start producing a lot more content with a wider network of collaborators. It's a very exciting time, but also very exciting time for us. It's going to be a very exciting time for everyone out there. Lots of opportunities to hear from voices that you may not have heard from before across our platform. It's going to be growing, I think, should be by leaps and bounds, because we're trying to create a network of collaborators that's going to actually make a bigger difference, like what we're doing here, and having overlapping audiences to boot too. So I just want to encourage everyone to, like David said, go to our YouTube channel, sign up, subscribe, go to our website, democracyatwork.info. Go there, sign up to get our newsletter, because that's where we disseminate all the upcoming events and programming that we're going to be releasing. Two very good ways to stay in contact with what we've got going on over at Democracy at Work.
And again, Redneck Gone Green is proud to be one of the programs on Democracy at Work. We are also eager to have other shows come in and cross-pollinate, because the only way we gonna win, y'all, is together. So in the meantime, I want to say, can't stop, won't stop. Peace.